Hello and welcome back to the next part in my series of videos where I show you how to set up your Synology NAS with DSM-7 right the very first time. Today we're going to be looking at surveillance, and this is certainly one of those areas where Synology have invested a lot of their time, money, research and development and more. You may not be aware, but your Synology NAS that you've purchased or one that you've had for years includes a frankly enterprise grade surveillance program that allows you to add multiple cameras in your home or business environment, which can then be picked up and be controlled with recorded feeds, different levels of stream quality, areas of interest control, motion detection and more. The application is available and included with DSM-7 on your NAS, and you do receive 2 camera licenses by default. In today's video we're going to be utilizing 2 cameras in the local area environment, both of them on Viv, and we're going to be controlling all of the parameters of our camera via the web browser. Now this is really important, because Surveillance Station for Synology is one of the few platforms out there that allows you to not only see the cameras via the web browser, but also control them in quite a detailed way. So the first thing you're going to need to do is install the application. It's available in the package center and it's available among the many Synology applications. Just go ahead and install it like you would any other app. Once you've done that, the application will need to initialize for the first time, but when it's done, it will appear among your many other applications, such as here, amongst here between some snapshot replication and video station. When you're ready, click the button and a new tab will open. Once again, as mentioned, although we're accessing this via the web browser, and it does work completely within the web browser, there are multiple applications available here in the client management area that will show you that not only can you access the cameras via the desktop, via client applications that you can install here on your Windows PC or Mac system, there's also mobile applications as well. To learn more, go into the application center and then from there go down to the client tools area here at the bottom, and you'll see that you can download the mobile application or the desktop tools as you see fit. We will be returning to the area here of the application center later to talk about some of the things that you can do with Surveillance Station. Now you're on the desktop user interface, the next thing you want to do is add some cameras. Now, before we go any further, it's worth remembering that you're going to need to make sure that any IP cameras, such as ones from Edimax, Reolink and more, are already installed in your local area network. They're going to need either power sources or they are PoE cameras. Now, if you need to know about compatibility on your Synology NAS, go ahead and head back into the product page for your NAS on Synology's own website, and from there select the compatibility tab at the top of the screen. So going back to Synology's own website here, we can go ahead and select the NAS that we're utilizing, in this case the DS920, head to the top right into the compatibility tab, and from there you will be asked to select which kind of compatibility you're looking for. In this case, we move away from this area here and search by category. In the category, we go ahead and select that we're looking for cameras, and it will allow you to go through different supported devices that are listed on their website. And again, from there, you will find lots of different supported cameras for Surveillance Station. Now, once you've got those connected, make sure they're on the same network as the NAS. That is to say that both the NAS and the cameras are connected to the same switch or router. Make sure the cameras are powered on, and then from the graphical user interface here on the NAS via this web browser, head over to the option IP camera. If you've not added any cameras yet, when the window pops up, it will ask you to add cameras. When you're ready, go ahead and click Add. Then it will ask you if you want to do a quick setup or a complete setup. I'm going to show you both just to show you the difference. The first one I'm going to show you is a quick setup. Go ahead and click Next. On the next tab, either enter the IP, that is the address of the camera on your network if you know it, alternatively click the spyglass. If you're using a camera that was already featured on the compatibility list for that Synology NAS, it should appear on the network here. Alternatively, if you're using a camera that supports ONVIF or OnViv, it will appear under this tab here. OnViv, for those that aren't aware, is a generic and default setting available on some cameras just to be picked up on the network. it may limit the Synology being able to utilize some of the hardware supported features on that camera, but it will make cameras a lot more generically accessible on the network. I'm going to go ahead and add our first camera, the one ending on the IP 110. From here, I'm going to click OK. Then I've got to add the login credentials for that camera. Once you've entered them, and double check that you're on the right port. If in doubt, leave it as the generic port, as well as if you do know the camera's model ID, you can change it if it's supported there on the brand. Go ahead and click Test Connection. If the camera and the login credentials are correct, it will appear in this window. Then click Next. And then from there, you just confirm the settings that you've created and click Finish. And then slowly, what the camera will do is reactivate on your network. You'll hear the camera rebooting, and then the Synology NAS will establish a connection, as well as connecting a license on your camera on your NAS to that camera. This can take a certain length of time depending on the camera and its complexity. So what we're going to do now, while it activates that first camera, is to add a second camera. This time, I'm going to go ahead and go for a complete setup. This will include not only adding the camera, but also managing some of the storage implications, something I'll also show you later on, able to edit them on the camera. Click Next, and once again, click the spyglass, and then select whichever one of these two tabs is more appropriate to your kind of camera. As we can see, I'm now going to add a second camera, the IP ending 112, and then click OK. You'll have to rename this camera if you're going to utilize the same brand, as it will use the same name. And also, don't forget to add those login credentials and click Test Connection to make sure the camera's working. If it's working, it should appear there on screen as you see. Then go ahead and click Next. This time around, it will ask you to select some of the format and recording quality settings. If your camera supports multiple different compression techniques such as H.264 or 5, otherwise known as HEVC, you can flick between them here. You can change the audio format or disable audio from the camera here. On top of that, you can change if the camera has multiple streaming qualities such as a low, medium or high bandwidth. In order to make camera recordings take up less of the network bandwidth, you can select them here. In this case, I can make sure that the high quality bandwidth is on 1 and select balance quality on 2. If you have multiple bandwidths possible in the camera, you can select a third option there. Additionally, when you look at the stream quality supported on any camera, you can change the resolution that's going to be outputted by that camera. As you can see, Stream 2 is a much lower quality by default. And again, it will flick between those different options of the recording resolution, as well as allowing you to change the frame rate. So, on this more balanced recording, I could increase the frame rate substantially. Because it's a lower quality resolution, I'll be able to increase the frame rate. Whereas this high quality recording up here, I'm going to lower the frame rate to make sure it has a much lower imprint on my network. The same goes for image quality settings and bandwidth control over the bit rate. So if you don't know how to configure these, it's much better to leave those as default. Click Next and you can select what you want to happen when the camera needs to make recordings. Do you want it to only record for a certain period of time, such as 5 seconds, or increase it to say 30 seconds? And that can be in the event of motion detection or other events that I'm going to show you later on how to set up. So in this case, if there's motion detection, not only will the recording capture the event, but it will record the 30 seconds prior and the 5 seconds after. So why don't we increase that to 30? That means if there is, for example, motion or line detection via the camera and a recording begins, the system will record 60 seconds. It will keep the 30 seconds before and after, and then after that, it will keep the recordings for 30 days. If you want to keep them permanently, untick that box. You can also limit just how much space I should say, that the NAS will hold the recordings. So by default, it will allow unlimited storage. But if you choose to, you can tick this box and limit the amount of storage space that surveillance recordings will use up on the NAS if you're worried that multiple surveillance cameras will eat up all of your storage. You can also change how and where recordings are kept on the NAS. Not only the volume that they're kept within, but also the naming conventions and more. Go ahead and click Next, and then from here you can say how and when you want the camera to record. By default, cameras will record constantly on this mode. However, to save recordings, some of you in a business environment may wish to make sure that on weekends only motion detection or permanent detection, depending on your business, are activated. As you can see, I've now set it up that on Saturdays and Sundays there's only motion detection. I can also set it up that motion detection by dragging over this box will take place weekdays all the way through the day until 9 AM and resume on motion detection from 6 PM onwards. Then we can set up a continuous recording there in the middle, or we can completely delete recordings in the middle of the day if we choose. But for the sake of this video, let's leave it at continuous recordings so we can go through some of those settings. We can also create customized recording patterns as well, which then could be set on different levels of detection that I'll show you how to do later on. Go ahead and click Next. Once again, it's now going to confirm those settings and start adding that camera. Again, this will take a different length of time depending on the complexity of the settings you've set up and indeed the camera itself and your network environment. Let's go back to that first camera now, because if you want to edit some of those settings within this camera tab, you can go ahead and start playing with some of these settings. You can edit one or all the cameras to have the same settings, as well as enable or disable the camera very quickly. You can also configure these cameras using preset recording patterns and preset settings that you can import or export to and from the NAS. Again, let's go ahead and edit some of those settings. As you can see, now we've already added that first camera, we didn't set up any of those settings, did we? We can change those theme settings that we saw earlier on, as well as change the audio settings and whether the user can change the ability to pan, tilt, zoom, that is to say rotate, move and zoom in on footage on that camera, enabling or disabling as we see fit. You can change those recording settings that we saw earlier on via this window, and again, all of that can be either set up at the default setup or returned to in these windows. Live view settings that we're going to go through in a moment can be adapted to make it much better for the local area network, and also whether you're accessing via a desktop client or a mobile client. And again, you can enable some of the buffering settings to improve or efficiently minimize network traffic and what's utilized during access. Time synchronization will allow on-screen timer recordings as well as how and when they're displayed, and any of the settings from the camera side or the NAS side. You can also change some of the output settings of the camera to be flip, rotated or more depending on your own setup and your own surveillance network. Now, event detection is going to be quite an intriguing and interesting area. As you can see here on screen, right now, that camera recording that I've got centered in this room is angled at a wall near a door here. What we can choose to do now is change some of those settings. So at the moment, they're set to when the camera notices things. But if we choose to, we can select surveillance station to monitor that. That means that rather than utilizing the camera control from the camera to push event alerts to surveillance station, we can choose for the NAS to do the handling. So for example, we can edit an area of detection. So in this case, we can go ahead and delete the area, and then from here, deleting all the settings, we can go ahead and add a brand new area. So in my case, I'd like to make sure that if this door opens, that this area now gets triggered. Click Save. And from that moment onwards, if that area of the recording where that box is changes within that pixel depth, and you can change the sensitivity if you choose, an event will be triggered by that door opening or closing. We can go ahead and click Save and carry on forward. Now both cameras have been added and I've shown you how to edit a number of those settings. We can go ahead and head back into the main desktop there of Surveillance Station. The next thing we can do is go into Live View. Now Live View is where we get our live camera feed from there, all of these cameras here on the desktop. Some cameras, like the one on the left hand side of the screen here, have the option of pan, tilt, zoom control. That is, that you can operate them. So for example, in this camera feed, if I hold the left button, it rotates the camera live there on screen and will rotate to the other side of the room where I'm going to start waving. There we go. To my right, I've got the other camera, which is a static camera that's pointed at the ceiling. So if I move my hand in front of it, you're able to see the difference there in frame rate between those two camera feeds. Once again, we can change and edit those settings if we choose, as well as zoom in on areas if we choose to. So we can either go ahead and zoom them in using optical zoom, or in the case of cameras like this one, we can go ahead and create a new zoom area like so. So drag and zoom here, and now if I put my hand up there, it will now appear in a much higher zoomed fashion. Once you're ready, you can come out and click minus there. Same goes for pan tilt zoom cameras. All you need to do is make sure you select that option, then select the area that you want to zoom into, and then it can zoom in closer. There you go. Once again, we can come out of it. Now, if you choose at any time, you can have a snapshot sent locally to the NAS, or you can download that footage directly to your desktop PC if you're accessing it. As you see, we've now downloaded it there. We can edit that footage or add further information. We can go back and look at instant playback if we want to go back to an older feed. There's also options to control the volume, whether we want to pause the recording or resume it. There's lots of different options all open here within this feed. And again, you don't have to use the touchscreen here in order to control pan tilt zoom, because you have the option here on the left hand side of the screen to rotate cameras easily utilizing those settings. Again, you can create patrol pans, upload emaps and more, which will be very centered on the way you have your own network environment there. And if you want to set up alerts or have a look at which alerts have been triggered in the past, they will all appear there using that tab. And of course, you can change a lot of the management settings with regards to alerts and the threshold for alerts, what happens, whether you want audio alerts and more, all for within this user interface. And again, depending on the complexity of your cameras and whether they are supported by Synology's own compatibility list, they will all be available to see here. Remember, we can still flick between those different bandwidths we created earlier at the touch of a button. Now, while we've got these two camera feeds here, this is all well and good. We can see what's going on with the cameras live. But what about those old recordings? Well, for that, I recommend heading over to the timeline. In the timeline section, it will show the full recorded footage on these cameras happening in real time. So, as you can see, we've not been recording for very long, but the camera in these blue areas here has noticed different kinds of movement. So earlier on during our recording, when I was playing with the recording and waving my hands, the alerts were triggered for motion on there. So even though the cameras have been recording constantly, as per the way we set both cameras up, motion was still annotated there on screen with different kinds of movement and different pixel changes as we move the cameras. We can flick between the timeline at the top left of the screen, which will allow us to look at different days of recordings, and of course we can increase the speed of these recordings quite substantially high on how quickly it will cycle through those recordings. But of course, because we've not recorded for very long, we reach the end of our recordings very quickly indeed. Again, we can flick between if we're utilizing different screen recordings at once, flick between them, and on top of that, we can seek different areas and utilize some search settings that are a great deal faster and smarter, as well as downloading local recordings if we choose directly via this user interface. It's that straightforward, and you can flick between individual cameras very, very easily indeed. Heading back into the main user interface here, we can have a look at some of the other features and functions before we wrap things up with our tutorial on Surveillance Station. If you want to just look at recordings and download, mount, export or import recordings from other devices on the local area network, options are available here, as well as bolting on additional storage remotely or locally. And again, going through recordings on a file-by-file level, as well as the alerts you've created, will all appear here. If you set up remote access to the NAS, or you've installed the localized client for PC or Mac, then any alerts will be immediately pushed to your devices, with further alerts being available and listed here at the top of the screen. If you're someone that has localized cameras in your home environment and you don't want to have the cameras running when you're at home, but anytime you leave the house ad hoc you want the cameras to kick in, I strongly recommend Home Mode. Home Mode is a great mode that, in my opinion, is wildly overlooked. Go ahead and install the DS Cam application on your iOS or Android device. That is the Synology Surveillance app. Once you've installed it, you can enable Home Mode. If the NAS and your mobile phone are on the same network environment, that is to say they're connected to the same switch or router, The minute your phone is far enough away from that network via Wi-Fi, so that is to say that you leave your house and walk away, the minute the NAS knows that you have left the Wi-Fi network with your phone, the result is the NAS will immediately activate all surveillance. It's a great way to have the cameras recording when you're not in the home, but always recording, have the cameras recording when you're not in the home, but always off when you come home, and not have to rely on a preset schedule. When you do have your Synology NAS, I recommend checking out this application center, as there's lots of applications that will allow you to make the very most of your NAS as a both home and business user. I've made individual videos on most of these, but let's go through them real quickly. Archive Vault will allow you to lock up and encrypt your recordings. Access Door Control is linked to network doors that utilize network locks that can then be utilized in conjunction with cameras, as well as a content management system in conjunction with your NAS. Device Pack allows support of further devices. Dual authorization, as you can understand, is a two-step access point. Edge recording, if you're utilizing cameras that have got SD cards inside, you can utilize those cards to work in conjunction with the NAS, which can then be used to synchronize with the NAS in the event of flaky network access and the recording on the SD card uploading or being at least accessible in the downtime to the NAS. I/O module will allow you to connect with other security devices with surveillance station, as well as IP speaker, taking advantage of network speakers in order for alerts or tannoy systems. Joystick, if you want to go through the camera feeds with the connected control deck, if you are utilizing the surveillance system locally. Live broadcast will allow you to connect an available surveillance feed from one of your cameras with a YouTube live stream, making it a great deal easier to share recordings or to utilize IP cameras in a live broadcast, either as a launch or just utilizing cameras in your environment for one reason or another to live cast to your clients or audience, with Live View Multicast doing a not dissimilar feature. Smart timed lapse allows you to go through old recordings very quickly, as already displayed. And there's other features here that are far more enterprise and shop-based, such as the Synology transaction device and the evidence integrity checker and transactions monitor, which can be utilized in shops, as well as verifying that video recordings have not been tampered with. And of course, Access barcode reader working in conjunction with Access cameras to be utilized with those IP cameras for security and recognizing barcodes in the environment. There's a lot to go through there, and the majority of these may well not be appropriate to home users, but I do recommend that you take a look at these features just to see that you can make the most of your Synology NAS with surveillance. I'm going to wrap things up here on Synology Surveillance Station application for DSM-7. If you want to learn more, we've got more parts coming up in this series where we talk about the security and remote access of your Synology NAS with DSM-7, so do check those out. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching. Do click the subscribe and bell to be notified in future parts in this series, as well as click like if you've enjoyed this video, as it helps me understand what I'm doing right and makes each video better than the last. And of course, take advantage of the free advice section over on NAS Compares. It's genuinely free, manned by two humans, me and Eddie the web guy, who will help you choose or at least fix your existing network or storage environment to be the best it can be. It's a completely free service, although it does get quite a lot of attention, so it may take us an extra day or two to answer your email. We do nothing with your email address, and if you want to donate, there's donate buttons, or you can just ignore them and get the free advice. It's totally up to you. I will see you on the next video.